Hello. It's good to have at least this kind of contact when we can't meet regularly at church on Sunday. We're thinking about that now and planning for it. We don't know when it's going to happen. But please, if you would, in the newsletter that this video is part of, please look there and see the information that we're talking about, planning ahead, and help us by sending us an email with what you think you might do. Now, let me give you some ideas for a reflection. In this time after Easter, the first readings every day have come from the Acts of the Apostles. They talk about the early church, what the apostles did after the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus. And the apostles spread out over the known world at that time. And Peter and Paul particularly started preaching and teaching to Gentiles, people who were not Jews, and started welcoming them into what would become the Catholic Church. Now, that did not sit well with a lot of the religious leaders. In every culture at every time, there are people who really don't like change. And at that time, there were conservative Jewish leaders who were against welcoming the Gentiles, saying that they're just like us. They argued that to be a Christian meant to be a Jew who would then accept Jesus as the Messiah. But Peter and Paul were not saying that. They were saying that the Gentiles coming in did not have to practice all the Jewish customs, but rather they could be full members of the followers of Jesus. And so there was a great discussion and argument about that, and the leaders of the church in Antioch sent a delegation of leaders to Jerusalem to talk with the apostles there. And they had what was the first council of the church. Today it's known as the Council of Jerusalem. And the council agreed with Peter and Paul that people who were not Jews did not need to become Jews in order to be followers of Jesus. The conservative Jewish leaders at the time grumbled at that idea. They said, "We're the chosen people. We've always done it this way. This is the way to be a Jew, and if you want to follow Jesus, well, first be a Jew and then choose to be one of the band of Jesus' followers." But the council said, no, we're not going to do it that way. And soon it became a moot question because there were many more non-Jews becoming Christians than there were Jews becoming Christian. The torch was being passed to a new generation. In every generation, it is really essential for us to know the difference between what is required in our belief, in our practice, and what is just a custom or a habit or part of our culture. I think the pandemic may be forcing us to make decisions like that now. The death and resurrection and the sending of the apostles forced the religious people of Jesus' time to think, what does it really mean to follow Jesus? And I think maybe the pandemic is going to make us reflect on things like that too. The decision of the Council of Jerusalem might give us pause and make us think, what are the decisions that we need to make today for our church and our culture? The death and resurrection of Jesus, the sending out of the apostles, that was a really radical event. It forced people to rethink, to look again, what do we believe? What does God want from us? How do we relate to God and relate to each other? And maybe now in our times, this experience of the coronavirus is another event like the Council of Jerusalem. Maybe it's a time for us to look and see, how do we do things? Do we need to change anything? A good example, I think, might be the area of liturgy. I have been really disappointed that what has happened on all the Sundays of the past month or two is that in so many places, some bishop or some priest gets up in an empty church and has a televised mass with just him, with no congregation. And people sitting at home or just watching it. I don't think that's really liturgy. I would have loved instead if the diocesan liturgy groups in every city, in every state, in every country would have got together and said, we can't meet on Saturday and Sunday, so can we prepare a handout that we can give to each family? Use the readings of the day, put in some prayers, put in a liturgy of the faithful, a litany of the faithful, put in some activities for children, print all that up, give it to every family and say, we can't meet together on Sunday, so you meet as the church in your living room on Sunday, and you pray together. You will be the church. I think our families would have learned so much from that. And maybe had a really new and different experience of praying together in a way they never did before. But instead, we've got so many people watching something on television where they're really not part of that. I think another example that maybe the pandemic is bringing up is, what do we do as church? For several centuries, I think being a good Catholic meant going to Mass on Sunday, having ourselves in church for an hour on Sunday. Is that what church is all about? Today, we're looking at who are the essential people that are keeping us going during this pandemic. Of course, there's the health professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the staffs of the hospitals. They are really essential. But so are the people who are keeping food in the supermarkets, the people who drive the food from the farms, bring the vegetables into the city, the people who are delivering all these things, the firefighters, the police who keep order. Those are essential people too. And maybe the church needs to focus more on people like them. So many of these people working at the lower level jobs, they don't have insurance. They don't have medical coverage. Many of them are not even getting a living wage. They're having a struggle. We say they are essential, and they're barely making a living. Maybe what the church should do is not worry so much about who's in church on Sunday. That's important. But maybe the more important thing is to worry about who's taking care of these people that we call essential. Do they have what they need? Do they have medical care? Do they have food? Do they have insurance? Do they have what they need to live a good life as God's children? I think those are the things that maybe the pandemic can really help us to look at. Maybe our focus as a church has been on the wrong things. And so maybe we're at another time, like at the Council of Jerusalem, where we really look and see, who is God? Who are we as God's children? What does God want from us? What are we called to do? How do we love God and love each other? Maybe that's a real question that the pandemic is inviting us now to ask.